St. Francis of Rome, the angel of the eternal city. Imagine living in a city that was once the center of the world, but now lies in ruins. The streets are covered with mud and blood. Entire families starve to death on the sidewalks. The Black Death returns every few years, mercilessly taking lives. Hungry wolves roam the city walls at night. Churches are looted and turned into stables. And even the Pope had to flee in disguise, hidden under a monk's cloak, sailing down the Tiber River by boat to avoid being killed. It was in this scene of chaos and despair, in Rome from the 14th to the 15th century, that a light of hope appeared. A wealthy woman who chose to live as a poor one, a mother who became the mother of an entire city, a saint who, for 24 years, had the extraordinary privilege of seeing and talking with her very own guardian angel, who walked beside her through the streets of Rome, visible only to her, like a companion of light. Today, on the Sancti et Heroes channel, we will discover the fascinating story of Saint Francis of Rome, the woman who saved Rome with the power of her love. #, a different child. Francis was born in the year 1384, into one of the most noble and wealthy families in Rome. Her father was named Paolo Bussa, and her mother, Jacobella dei Rofredeschi. Both came from illustrious lineages, related to the great Roman families of Orsini and Savelli. On the day of her birth, she was taken to the Church of St. Agnes in Piazza Navona, where she was baptized. Who could have imagined on that day that this baby would be one of the greatest gifts God would give to the city of Rome? From a very young age, Frances was different from other children her age. When her mother held her in her arms, she felt an involuntary reverence for her daughter, as if an angel of God, not an ordinary child, had been lent to her. There was a heavenly expression in her eyes, a serenity that impressed everyone who came near. Frances learned to read at the same time she learned to speak. The first words she was taught to pronounce were the sacred names of Jesus and Mary. By the age of 2 or 3, she already had the wisdom and intelligence of an adult. She never played like other children. When left alone, she would withdraw to the quiet corners of her father's palace, kneel down, fold her little hands in prayer, and read devotional books or repeat hymns to the Virgin Mary, whom she called my dear mother. By the age of 6, she had already stopped eating meat, eggs, or any kind of sweets, living on cooked vegetables and simple bread. She never drank anything but pure water. The need to eat seemed like a burden to her. Her mother took her to churches for the Stations of the Cross and processions, and Frances never lost focus during the sermons. When she returned home, she would repeat everything she had heard with a depth that amazed the adults. By the age of 11, Frances had already made a firm decision in her heart. She wanted to be a nun, dedicate her entire life to God, and live in poverty, far from all the luxury that surrounded her. She had kept this desire a secret for years, revealing it only to God and to her confessor, a wise Benedictine priest named Father Antonio di Montesavello, who had been guiding her since she was 6. Every Wednesday, little Frances would go to the Church of Santa Maria Nuova to confess to him, seek advice about her spiritual life, and receive his guidance. This priest would be her spiritual guide for 35 years. # a marriage she didn't want. But God's plans for Frances were different from hers. At that time, marriages were arranged by the parents, and Frances's father, a powerful man, had already promised his daughter in marriage to Lorenzo Ponziani, a young nobleman, wealthy and commander of the papal troops. Lorenzo came from a distinguished family, descended from a martyred pope, and was considered the most promising young man in Rome. When Frances heard this, her heart sank. She fell to her knees before her father and begged him to change his mind, to let her follow what she believed was God's will. Torrents of tears streamed down her face as she pleaded, but Paolo Bussa was unyielding. His word was pledged, and nothing would make him back down. Seeing him firm, Frances rose silently, withdrew to her small oratory, prostrated herself before the crucifix, and asked God for guidance. Then she hurried to the Church of Santa Maria Nuova to speak with Father Antonio. The kind priest listened to her tenderly and said words she would never forget. If your parents insist on their decision, take it as a sign that God expects this sacrifice from you. Offer him your burning desire for the religious life. He will accept the will as the act. God wants your heart, Frances, but he also wants your whole person as an offering. That is why he wants your will, to shape it according to his. Why do you cry? Don't be only God's bride, be his faithful and loving servant, no matter where he places you. With a heavy heart but full of obedience, Frances accepted the marriage. And so, still very young, she became the wife of Lorenzo Ponziani. It's important to understand that in those times, during the Middle Ages, marriages of young nobles were arranged by families as political and social alliances, and adulthood began much earlier than it does today. Frances was not the only one to face this situation. Many saints of the church experienced it, like Saint Elizabeth of Hungary and Saint Rita of Cassia. What made Frances special was not the circumstance, but the way she transformed this sacrifice into holiness. The early years of marriage. Francisca was welcomed with joy and tenderness by Lorenzo, her father Andrew, her mother Cecilia, and by Venosa, the wife of Lorenzo's older brother. But the noise, the excitement, and the visits that come with a wedding weighed heavily on Francisca's spirit. Venosa noticed that her new sister-in-law's little heart was burdened by some secret sadness and gently asked her what was wrong. Francisca could not resist the kind invitation and revealed her pain. She said that the world had never given her pleasure, that her affections were elsewhere, and that she longed to live only for God. "If these are your feelings, my dear little sister," exclaimed Venosa, "my sympathy can help console you. For I too find no pleasure in the vanities of the world, but only in prayer and meditation. Let us be friends, Francisca. I will help you live the life you desire, and together we will reach the goal we have in mind." These kind words filled Francisca's heart with joy. And from that day forward, a friendship blossomed between the two young women that lasted 38 years, becoming a great source of consolation for both through all the sufferings to come. In her new home, Francisca followed the same way of life she had practiced in her father's house. She received visits from noble ladies of her rank and returned their visits punctually. She submitted to appearing in public with all the pomp befitting her position and accepted and wore the expensive dresses and splendid jewelry her husband gave her. But beneath those rich silks and brocades, a hair shirt was hidden. She never danced, never played cards, and never stayed up late at night. Her manner was so gentle and kind that it inspired affection in all who approached her. But there was also a deep and solemn purity in her appearance and behavior that effectively prevented any loose or licentious words from being spoken in her presence. But the early years of marriage were marked by a severe trial. The inner sadness, the conflict between her desire for a religious life and the demands of social life, left Francisca gravely ill. For months she lay in bed, near death, with no doctor able to cure her. Then a miracle happened. One night, in great suffering, Saint Alexis appeared to her in a radiant vision. He asked if she wanted to live or die. Francisca answered simply, "I want only what God wills." Saint Alexis smiled and said, "The Lord wants you to live to glorify Him." At that very moment, Francisca was completely healed, to the joy and amazement of the whole family. From that day on, Francisca understood her true mission. She would be a loving wife, a devoted mother, and the perfect homemaker, but never forgetting God. The mother of the family. Frances and Lorenzo had 3 children, Battista, Evangelista, and Agnes. Frances cared for them with endless love, teaching them the faith from their very first steps. Evangelista, in particular, was a child of extraordinary spirituality. From his earliest years, he seemed more made for the company of angels than for earthly company. Being with God was his only dream of happiness. By the age of 9, he was already helping his mother in the education of little Agnes. Frances wisely and kindly managed the vast Ponziani family palace. She treated the servants not as servants, but as brothers and sisters, personally caring for them when they fell ill. She had a golden rule that she repeated to her spiritual daughters. A married woman, when called, must leave God at the altar to find Him in her household tasks. For her, there was no contradiction between a life of prayer and the duties of the home. Every household chore was a prayer. Every care for her husband and children was an act of love for God. One day, while praying the divine office in her room, she was called by her husband 4 times in a row for the most trivial reasons. Each time she calmly closed the book, attended to her family with a smile, and returned to pray. The 4th time she returned to the book, She found the antiphon she had started and left unfinished 4 times, written in shining golden letters. Then Elsa, who was present, witnessed the miracle, and the guardian angel whispered to Frances, "Thus the Lord rewards the virtue of obedience." The golden letters remained in the book until the day of her death. ## the charity that transformed Rome. But Francisca's heart beat strongest for the poor of Rome. The city was going through terrible times. The Great Western Schism divided the church, with 3 rival popes at the same time. Wars destroyed the harvests, and the Black Plague haunted the streets once again. The hunger was so great that people died on the sidewalks. Francisca could not bear to see so much suffering. With the help of her sister-in-law Vanessa, who became her great friend and companion in charity, Francisca began transforming the family palace into a true hospital and food distribution center. Every day, the 2 noble women dressed in simple clothes and went out through the most dangerous and dirty streets of Rome. They brought food, clothes, and medicine to the sick and hungry. When the palace's supplies ran out, Francisca did not hesitate. She went begging at the doors of churches, sitting among the common beggars, holding out her hand like them so she could feed the poor. At first, Francisca's father-in-law was furious to see his daughter-in-law emptying the family's barns and wine cellars, but God intervened in a wonderful way. One day, when the barn was completely empty, Francisca prayed with faith, and suddenly, the barn was miraculously filled with the most golden and perfect wheat anyone had ever seen. On another occasion, the barrel of wine that had dried up began to flow again, with wine of heavenly quality. Faced with these miracles, Lorenzo's family realized that God was with Francisca and began to support her charitable works. ## The war reaches the palace. Francisca's life was also marked by great sorrows. In the year 1409, when Francisca was 25 years old, war came with full force to Rome. The troops of King Ladislaus of Naples invaded the city, supported by the Colonna faction, who backed a rival pope. Lorenzo Ponziani, the most prominent man of the legitimate pope's party, led the papal troops in one of the battles. In the midst of the fight, he was recognized by the enemies and became the special target of their attacks. Fighting with heroic courage, he was struck by a treacherous dagger that pierced his side deeply. He fell to the ground and was taken away as if dead. The terrible news reached the Ponziani palace. Francisca was stunned for a moment, as if struck by lightning, but soon she lifted her eyes to heaven with a steady gaze, forgave the assassin, offered Lorenzo's life and her own to God, and murmured the words of Job. "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Then, calm and serene, she went to meet those who were bringing her husband's body. When they placed him in the palace hallway, she knelt beside him and, placing her face close to his, noticed the faint signs of life still remaining in that seemingly lifeless body. Day and night she kept vigil beside Lorenzo. Her experience in caring for the sick and treating wounds allowed her to provide the most meticulous and effective care. Her watchful love and constant tenderness were rewarded. God gave back that life, far more precious to her than her own. Against all expectations, Lorenzo slowly recovered. But the enemy commander, the Count of Traja, had not yet finished tormenting the family. He imprisoned Peluso, Francisca's brother-in-law, and demanded that her eldest son, Battista, 8 or 9 years old, be handed over as a hostage. Otherwise, Peluso would be executed. Francisca could not consult Lorenzo, for the news might kill him. She looked at her son's innocent face and could not give him up. Holding the boy's hand, she ran through the streets of Rome, not knowing where to go, like a second Hagar fleeing into the desert. Suddenly she stopped. Before her stood Don Antonio, her confessor. He listened to her and said that God had inspired him to tell her something. "Francisca, you are running to save the child. God sends me to tell you that it is to the capital you must take him, for there lies your safety. And you must go to the church of Aracoli." A fierce struggle arose in Francisca's heart. To the capital, that is where the tyrant awaits him. But before the words could be spoken, they died on her lips. Grace won. With a firm step, she retraced her path. People in the streets shouted for her to return, tried to snatch the boy from her arms by force. But in vain. She pushed them away and continued on to the capital, where she handed her son over to the tyrant. Then, without looking back, she ran to the church of Ercole, fell prostrate at the feet of the image of Our Lady, and there made the sacrifice of her son, her life, and all she had. For the first time, a flood of tears relieved her heavy heart. And looking at the image, she saw the eyes of the Most Holy Virgin take on the most tender and encouraging expression, and in her ears were whispered words as sweet as dew. "Do not be afraid. I am here to support you." And the miracle happened. When the soldiers tried to place Battista on the horse to take him away, the animal refused to move. They changed horses several times, and none of them took a single step. Frightened by this divine sign, the commander returned the boy to Francisca. The invasion, the exile, and the ruin. But the war was not over yet. Ladislas of Naples returned to attack Rome with an even larger army. This time, the city was handed over to looting. The basilicas were stripped of their treasures and desecrated with abominable orgies. The churches were turned into stables. Many of the faithful were tortured or brutally murdered. The Ponziani were among the Pope's main supporters. Lorenzo, barely recovered from his serious wound, was persuaded by his friends to flee to a distant province to hide from the conqueror's fury. It was impossible to take his wife and children with him. Francisca was left exposed to a succession of the most terrible disasters. The family's wealth consisted mainly of their countryside estates and vast herds of cattle. Day after day, news arrived that another farm had been burned or looted, the herds scattered or destroyed, and the shepherds killed by the brutal soldiers. Then, one fateful morning, a troop of savages drunk with rage burst into the palace, shouting for Lorenzo and threatening to torture the servants if they did not reveal his hiding place. They forcibly tore Battista from his mother's arms and ransacked the palace, turning that magnificent residence into a pile of ruins in just a few hours. Deprived of her husband, her son, and all the comforts of life, Francisca was left alone with her two youngest children, Evangelista and Agnes, in a corner of the destroyed palace. It is not known exactly how long Battista's captivity lasted, but it is known that he was later freed and sent to his father in exile. When peace returned, father and son came back together. The famine, the plague, and the miracles of the ointment. Meanwhile, Rome was being destroyed from within. The second invasion was followed by a terrible famine, which was then followed by a severe plague. The streets were covered with the victims of the contagious disease. Elderly people died surrounded by the corpses of their children. Mothers held their starving babies close to their chests. No carriages rattled along the public roads. Grass grew in the deserted streets. Only a funeral procession slowly moved through the condemned city, collecting the dead at every doorstep. Francis, together with Venosa and Riticelli, transformed the large hall left from the destroyed palace into an improvised hospital. With broken furniture scattered around the house, they made beds and blankets. When everything was ready, they went out in search of the sick. If they found someone too weak to walk, they carried them in their arms. At the hospital, they washed and dressed the purulent wounds, prepared medicines and food, watched over the sick day and night, cared for their bodies, and even more for their souls, bringing many back to God. When the food ran out, Francis and Venosa went out to beg for alms. No longer dressed as nobles, but in clothes of poverty, they sat among the common beggars at the church doors, extending their hands like them, and gratefully received the pieces of bread that fell from the tables of the rich. The moldiest piece of bread from the bag was kept for themselves, while the best was given to the sick. It was at this time that God granted Francis the extraordinary gift of healing. Many patients considered lost by doctors were restored to health by the simple touch of her hands or by the prayers she offered on their behalf. More than 60 of these cases were well attested at the time of her canonization. Francis, deeply aware of the blessing of this gift and grateful for the power it gave her to ease the suffering of others, at the same time felt that her humility obliged her to hide it as much as possible. She tried to do this by preparing an ointment made of olive oil and wax, which she applied to the sick, whatever their illness, hoping that the recovery would always be attributed to the effectiveness of the ointment. But this holy ruse did not always work. The doctors analyzed the ointment and declared that it did not possess any healing qualities by itself. The power came from Francis's prayers. One day, upon entering the Trastevere hospital, Francis found a poor cart driver who had just been brought in with his foot crushed by the fall of a sickle. His condition was so horrible and hopeless that the surgeons were about to amputate the limb. Francis, hearing the poor man's cries, bent over him, exhorting him to patience. Promising him quick relief, she applied some of her ointment to the mutilated foot. The wounds closed instantly, the pain disappeared, and shortly after the cart driver returned to his usual work. A few days later, the two sisters were returning from the Basilica of St. John Lateran when, passing over the Santa Maria Bridge, they saw a man lying on the pavement whose arm had been cut off by a sword. Unable to get medical help, the poor man had been there ever since in excruciating torment. Francis, full of compassion, carried him with Vanazza's help into her home, placed him in a warm bath, carefully cleaned the wound, and dressed it with her ointment. In a short time, without any medical assistance, the severed limb was restored to its usual position, and a full recovery followed. The bowl in which St. Francis prepared this miraculous remedy is still preserved today in the convent of Torre-Specchi. During the Saint's Novena, when the doors are open to crowds of devotees, it sits on a table in the entrance chamber and is daily filled by the nuns with fresh, fragrant flowers. An even more wonderful miracle occurred at this time. Francis and Vanazza were visiting churches when, passing by a humble house, they heard the most heart-wrenching sobs and cries. Stopping to investigate, they found the mother frantically weeping over the body of a child who had died a few hours after birth without having received baptism. Francis gently reproached the woman for the delay that had put her child's salvation at risk. Then, taking the small corpse in her arms, she uttered a fervent prayer, and in a moment returned the baby to the mother, completely restored to life and health. She ordered that the child be baptized immediately, and then fled, trusting that she would remain unknown. And indeed, the woman whose child she had saved had never seen her before, and wondered for some time if an angel had visited her in disguise. The death of Evangelista and the gift of the angel. The war was over, but the Black Plague struck Rome again, and this time, tragedy knocked on Francisca's door. Evangelista, her son of only 9 years, fell ill with the pestilence. From the very first symptom, he asked for a confessor. He never doubted that his final hour had come, as she believed it too. Father Anthony hurried to the boy's bedside. After confessing, Evangelista called his mother, took her hand, and spoke words she would never forget. "My dear mother, I have often told you that God would not leave me with you for long, that He wants me to live with His angels. Jesus is my treasure, my hope, and my joy. I have always lived with Him in my thoughts, my desires, and unspeakable longings. Every day I said, 'Thy kingdom come,' and now He is calling me to it. There is a crown prepared for me, my beloved mother. The Lord is about to give it to me, and we must part for a time. But bless His name, O my mother. Praise Him with me, for He is freeing me from all that your love feared for me on earth. There is no sin, no sorrow, no sickness where I am going. Nothing but peace and joy, and the vision of God in that better land where the blessed await me. I must not see you weep. I do not want you to grieve. Rejoice with your son, for I see now my holy advocates, Saint Anthony and Saint Valerius. They are coming to take me. Dearest mother, I will pray for you. Evangelista will love you in heaven as he loved you on earth, and you will come to him there." The dying boy was silent for a few moments. Then a sudden light illuminated his face. His features seemed transfigured. Raising his eyes with a look of ecstasy, he exclaimed, "Here are the angels coming to take me. Give me your blessing, mother. Do not be afraid. I will never forget you. God bless you and my dear father, and all who belong to this house. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Then, crossing his little arms over his chest, he bowed his head, a last smile passed over his face, and his young spirit departed to the realms of eternal bliss. At that very moment, in a neighboring house, a girl who had been seriously ill for a long time and had completely lost the power of speech suddenly sat up in her bed and exclaimed loudly several times, in a state of evident ecstasy, "Look, look! How beautiful! Evangelista Panziani is ascending to heaven, and 2 angels with him." Shortly after, little Agnes, only 5 years old, also fell ill and died. Francisca buried her 2 children together in the church of St. Cecilia in Trastevere. #The visible angel. It was after Evangelista's death that Francis received the greatest gift of her spiritual life. About a year after his passing, Francis was praying in her oratory when she noticed that the small room was suddenly illuminated in a supernatural way. A mysterious light shone all around, and its radiance seemed to penetrate not only her outward senses, but the deepest recesses of her being, awakening in her soul a strange feeling of joy. She raised her eyes, and Evangelista was before her, his familiar appearance unchanged, yet his features transfigured and radiating an ineffable splendor. Beside him stood another, the same size and height as him, but even more beautiful. Francis tried to speak, but in vain. The joy and terror of that moment were too intense. Evangelista approached her with an angelic expression of love and respect, bowed his head, and greeted her. Then maternal feelings prevailed. She forgot everything except his presence and opened her arms to him. But it was not an earthly form she embraced, and the glorified body slipped from her embrace. Then she gathered courage and questioned him, in broken tones but with trembling anxiety. "Is it really you, O son of my heart? Where do you come from? Who are your companions? What is your dwelling? Angel of God, did you think of your mother, your poor father? Amid the joys of paradise, did you remember the earth and its sufferings?" Evangelista looked up to heaven with an indescribable expression of peace and joy. Then, fixing his eyes on his mother, he said, "My dwelling is with God. My companions are the angels. Our only occupation is the contemplation of divine perfections, the inexhaustible source of all happiness. Eternally united to God, we have no will but His, and our peace is as complete as His being is infinite. He Himself is our joy, and that joy knows no bounds. There are 9 choirs of angels in heaven, and the higher orders of angelic spirits instruct the less elevated intelligences in divine mysteries. If you want to know my place among them, my mother, know that God, in His great goodness, assigned me to the 2nd choir of angels and the 1st hierarchy of archangels. This companion of mine is higher than I in rank, just as he is brighter and more beautiful in appearance. The divine majesty appointed him to you as guardian during the remainder of your earthly pilgrimage. Day and night by your side, he will assist you in all things. Never, amid the joys of paradise, did I forget you for a moment, or any of my beloved on earth. I knew you were resigned, but I also knew your heart would rejoice to see me again, and God allowed me thus to gladden your eyes. But I have a message for you, my mother. God calls Ines. She cannot delay much longer with you. Her place is ready in the New Jerusalem." Evangelista communed with his mother for a while longer, and then, bidding her a tender farewell, disappeared. But the archangel remained, and until the day of her death was always present to her sight. When Evangelista had parted from his mother, she had fallen prostrate on the ground and blessed God for His great mercy. Then, turning to the angel, she begged him to be her guide and director, to show her the path she should follow, to fight with her against Satan and his ministers, and to teach her each day to become more like in spirit to their Lord. When she left the oratory, the archangel followed her, and, surrounded by a halo of light, remained always visible to her, though imperceptible to others. The glow that surrounded him was so dazzling that she could rarely look at him steadily. At night, and in the deepest darkness, she could always write and read by the light of that supernatural radiance. By order of Dom Antonio, Francis described the angel thus: "His stature is that of a child about 9 years old, his appearance full of sweetness and majesty. His eyes usually turn toward heaven. Words cannot describe the divine purity of that gaze. His forehead is always serene. His looks kindle in the soul the flame of ardent devotion. When I look at him, I understand the glory of angelic nature and the degraded condition of ours. He wears a long, shining robe, and over it a tunic, sometimes as white as the lilies of the field, sometimes the color of a red rose, sometimes the color of the sky when it is deepest blue. When he walks by my side, his feet are never soiled by the mud of the streets or the dust of the road." But the presence of the angel was also for Francis a mirror in which she could see reflected every imperfection of her fallen nature. When she committed the slightest fault, the angel seemed to disappear, and it was only after she had carefully examined her conscience discovered her fault, lamented, and humbly confessed it, that he returned. On the other hand, when she was merely troubled by a doubt or scruple, he would often give her a gentle look that immediately dispelled her unease. When he spoke, she saw his lips move, and a voice of indescribable sweetness, yet seeming to come from afar, reached her ears. His guidance enlightened her, especially regarding the difficulty she felt in submitting to certain cares and obligations belonging to her position as lady and head of the household. She was prone to imagine that the hours thus spent were lost in God's eyes, but her heavenly guardian corrected her judgment on this point and taught her to discern the divine will in every small worldly duty that was inconvenient, in every little contradiction, just as in great trials and important occasions. Francis used to say to Dom Antonio when asking permission for some additional austerities that he hesitated to grant, "Do not be afraid, Father. The archangel will not allow me to go too far on this path. He always restrains me when I am tempted to transgress the limits of prudence." The return of peace and family. 4 long years had passed with Rome plunged into dissension and civil discord. But then, in August of 1414, King Ladislaus of Naples, the tyrant who had caused so much suffering, died from an illness brought on by his incredible excesses between Nerni and Perugia. With his death, peace was restored to the Papal States, and in particular to the city of Rome. With the end of the civil wars, famine disappeared, and with it, the terrible plague that had accompanied it for so long. The fields were cultivated once again. The peasants gradually returned to their farms. The flocks grazed undisturbed on the green pastures of the Campagna. The sufferings of the Ponziani had also come to an end. They were called back from exile, and their properties were restored. Lorenzo and his son, now his only son Battista, returned home to the wife and mother they had longed to see again. But mingled with the sadness was the cup of joy that moment seemed to offer. Lorenzo, who just a few years before had been in the prime of life, strong, healthy, and energetic, was now broken by long suffering, aged more by exile and grief than by years. When he entered the palace and looked at his wife, deep sobs shook his chest, and he burst into an agony of tears. The 2 beautiful children he had left beside her, where were they? Gone, never again to brighten his eyes or fill their home with the sound of their sweet voices. Long and bitterly he wept, and Francisca gently comforted him. She told him how Evangelista had appeared to her, how their children had only gone ahead of them, now companions of the angels they had so much resembled on earth. She whispered to him that one of those angels was always by his side, and when he looked at her and remembered all she had been to him, surely he found it easy to believe. Taught by adversity and more than ever influenced by his admirable wife, Lorenzo from then on adopted a way of life more deeply Christian than he had followed until then. Not content to praise her virtues, he sought to imitate them and practiced all the duties of religion with the greatest rigor. The difficult daughter-in-law and Mobilia's conversion. Battista, the son of Lorenzo and Francis, had reached the age of 18 and was considered the most promising of the young Roman nobles. Lorenzo, eager to continue his family line, pressured his son to marry. Francis was delighted to support his wishes. She longed to entrust the management of household affairs to a daughter-in-law and have more freedom to devote her time to religious and charitable work. The young woman chosen by Battista and his parents was named Mobilia, a maiden of noble birth and singular beauty. Immediately after the wedding, according to the continental custom of the time, the bride came to live under the same roof as her father-in-law and mother-in-law. She was welcomed as a beloved daughter by Francis and Venosa, but she did not return their affection, nor seem sensitive to their kindness. Raised by an excellent mother in a very strict and secluded manner, her head was completely turned when she suddenly found herself her own mistress. Adored by her husband, provided with the broadest means to satisfy all her whims, she was determined to make up for the somewhat austere life she had led as a girl, and thought of nothing but her beauty, her dress, and all the entertainments within her reach. Imperious with her equals, haughty with her superiors, she assumed every imaginable air, and treated her mother-in-law with the utmost contempt, scarcely paying her more attention than if she were the lowest servant in the house. In the lively social circles she frequented, her favorite pastime was to ridicule Francis, imitate her manners and style of conversation, and she often declared herself perfectly ashamed to be related to a person so utterly ignorant of the ways of the world. "How can anyone feel respect," she used to ask, "for a person who thinks of nothing but the poor, dresses like one of them, and walks the streets carrying bread, firewood, and old clothes?" Her husband's and father-in-law's reprimands were in vain, as were their pleas and reproaches. The saint bore all her insolence with unfailing gentleness and patience, never uttering a harsh or cruel word in response, and spending long hours in prayer that the heart so closed against her, and so given over to the world, might by God's mercy be softened and changed. One day, while renewing these petitions with more than usual fervor, she clearly heard the following words spoken: "Why do you grieve, Francis? And why is your soul troubled? Nothing happens without my permission, and all things work together for the good of those who love me." And her trial was about to end. It happened a few days later, when all the inhabitants of the palace were gathered around the fire in the hall, for it was winter, that Mabilia began, as usual, to attack her mother-in-law and ridicule her way of life with even more bitterness than usual. Suddenly she turned pale as death, a tremor seized her, and in a moment she fell unconscious. Francis and Venosa carried her to bed, where, regaining consciousness, she was seized by sharp pains. The intensity of her suffering wrung from her the most pitiful cries. Then her conscience was awakened. Then, as if suddenly roused to a sense of the enormity of her conduct, with a faltering voice she murmured, "My pride, my dreadful pride." Francis bent over her gently, begged her to bear her sufferings with patience, assured her they would soon cease. Then Mabilia burst into an agony of tears and exclaimed before all present, "They will cease, my dear mother, if you ask God, but I deserved more, much more, for my dreadful behavior toward you. Forgive me, dear mother, pray for me. I acknowledge my fault. From now on, if God spares my life, your daughter will be the most loving, the most obedient of servants to you. Take me in your arms, mother, and bless your daughter." Francis pressed the beautiful young creature to her breast, in whom so sudden a change had been wrought, and while she blessed her fervently, Mabilia felt all her pains leave her. From that day forward, the tone of her whole mind was changed, her conversion was complete. Francis became to her an object of the most affectionate veneration. Mabilia began to consult Francis about all her actions, and to communicate her most secret thoughts to her. Completely despising the vanities of the world that had led her astray, she adopted her views and opinions. Mabilia was the one who, after Francis's death, gave the most detailed and important testimony in the canonization process, swearing to the miracles she had witnessed. The Oblates of Mary, saints in the midst of the world. Francisca's example attracted other noble women of Rome. They wanted to live like her, dedicating themselves to God and the poor, but without leaving their families. Francisca gathered them around her like a mother, and together they went to the church of Santa Maria Nuova, where Francisca had prayed since childhood. In 1425, on the day of the Assumption of Our Lady, at dawn, Francisca, Venosa, Rita de Celli, Agnese Celli, and 6 other noble Roman ladies confessed, received instructions from Father Antonio, and received communion at a Mass celebrated before the miraculous image of the Virgin. Immediately after the Holy Sacrifice, they consecrated themselves to the service of Our Lady as Oblates of Mary. But what did it mean to be an Oblate of Mary? It was a completely new way of life. These women continued living in their homes, caring for their husbands and children, managing their households, but they followed a rule of life based on prayer, humility, and charity. They regularly gathered at the Church of Santa Maria Nuova to receive communion on the feasts of Our Lady. They supported each other in their spiritual struggles. They visited the poor and the sick together, and they had Francisca as their spiritual mother, whom they consulted about everything. Father Antonio, their director, did not assign them any special tasks. He only urged them to the most scrupulous obedience to the commandments of God and the Church, to a tender devotion to the Mother of God, to diligent participation in the sacraments, and to the practice of all Christian virtues and the various works of mercy. The bond between them consisted in their constant attendance at the Church of Santa Maria Nuova, where they received communion at all the feasts of Our Lady, and in a tender veneration for Francisca, whom they looked to as their spiritual mother. They insisted on being guided by the one they loved so much and gave up every pleasure to be with her and share in her endeavors. The founding of the convent. Years later, with the approval of Pope Eugene IV, Francis founded the Congregation of the Oblates of Tor di Specchi, where women who were unmarried or widows could live together in community, following a stricter rule of life. The name came from an old tower called Tor di Specchi, Tower of Mirrors, located in the Campitelli district, across from the capital, not far from the Church of Santa Maria Nuova. On March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, in the year 1433, the Oblates, numbering 10, gathered at the Church of Santa Maria in Trastevere, attended Mass, and received communion with great fervor. Then, in procession, they went to the house they would call home from that day forward. But Frances, meanwhile, could not enter with them. Lorenzo was still alive, and she could not abandon him. She was like Moses, who could see the promised land from the spiritual solitude she so longed for, but could not enter it. She visited the sisters as often as possible, worked in the kitchen or the parlor without distinction, served at the table and washed the dishes, never tolerating being treated with the slightest distinction. Upon entering and leaving, she always reverently kissed the hand of Agnes de Celis, the superior, and asked for her blessing. The death of Lorenzo and entering the convent. In 1436, after 40 years of marriage, Lorenzo Ponziani passed away. He had been a just man, and his death was the death of the righteous. Few men could have been as worthy of a wife as Frances. From the moment they married, he had admired her virtues, rejoiced in her piety, encouraged her good works, and largely shared them. When he saw his wife renouncing all the pleasures and vanities of the world, dressing as a poor person, wearing herself out in the zeal of her charity, and turning half of their palace into a hospital, he did not complain but rejoiced. When Lorenzo died, Frances, already 52 years old, finally fulfilled the dream of her childhood. She went to the convent of Tor di Specchi. At the foot of the stairs, having taken off her black dress, her veil, and her shoes, and placed a rope around her neck, she knelt down, kissed the floor, and shedding abundant tears, made her general confession aloud in the presence of all the Oblates. She described herself as a miserable sinner, a grave offender against God, and asked permission to live among them as the humblest of their servants, to learn from them how to amend her life and enter a holier path. Frances's spiritual daughters hurried to lift her up and embrace her. Dressing her in their habit, they led her to the chapel, where all gave thanks to God. While she remained there in prayer, Agnes de Celis, the superior, gathered the sisters in the chapter room and declared that now that their true mother and foundress had come among them, it would be absurd for her to remain in her current office, that Frances was their guide, their leader, and that she would immediately resign her authority into her hands. All approved her decision, and gathering around the saint, announced their wishes to her. As expected, Frances vehemently refused to accept this proposal and claimed her inability to fulfill the duties of a superior. The Oblates appealed to Dom Giovanni, who began by begging and finally commanded her to accept the office. She never resisted his orders, and so on March 25th, she was duly elected to that position. The last years and the death of the saint. Frances lived her last 4 years in the convent with a joy and peace that radiated from her face. She led the sisters with a blend of firmness and tenderness. She never let a single imperfection go without correction, but at the same time, she was the most caring about their health, always trying to provide them with some innocent recreation whenever possible. In March of 1440, she had to return to the Ponziani palace to care for her son Battista, who was gravely ill. There, she herself fell ill. Her confessor, Dom Giovanni, upon seeing her, was struck by the paleness more than usual on her face and the obvious exhaustion she was suffering, and he ordered her, as a matter of obedience, to return immediately to the Ponziani palace and spend the night there. This order was a severe trial for Frances, for she immediately felt that if she did not return now to Tor di Specchi, she would never enter those sacred walls again. But, faithful to the spirit of perfect obedience, she bowed her head in submission and returned to her son's home. During the night, a violent fever set in. Frances sent immediately for her director and asked him to inform her spiritual daughters of her illness. 4 of them rushed to her side, and when they heard her implore Dom Giovanni not to omit any necessary precautions for the welfare of her soul, they all burst into tears, seeming to understand at once that their beloved mother was about to leave them. During the night, a vision was granted to the saint. Our Lord appeared, surrounded by angels and saints, and announced to her that in 7 days she would die and receive the crown prepared for her in heaven. Sister Agustina, who kept vigil over her, saw her face shine with a supernatural glow, a radiant smile on her lips, and heard her say with ineffable unction, "Be forever praised and blessed, O my dear Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks to you for the undeserved mercies I have received from your hands. To you, only you, I owe all the blessings I have and still have to receive." During the following 7 days, Frances suffered greatly, but no word or sound of complaint escaped her. Her face was as serene as if her body were perfectly free of pain. Each day she repeated, as if in perfect health, the office of the Most Holy Virgin, the Rosary, and all her usual prayers. On the 7th day of her illness, as she herself had announced, her life came to an end. A sublime expression animated her face, an ethereal beauty clothed her earthly form. Her confessor for the last time asked what her rapt eyes saw, and she whispered, "Heaven is opening. The angels are descending. The archangel has finished his task. He stands before me. He beckons me to follow him." These were the last words Frances spoke. A smile of indescribable brightness lit up her face. The eyes that had long been closed to the vanities of life were then closed in death, and her spirit made its final farewell to earth. It was the 9th day of March in the year 1440. Hash, the funeral and the miracles. The news of her death spread quickly throughout Rome. The heart of the great city was stirred to its depths. A mourning, anxious, and loving crowd surrounded the palace and the very bedside of the dying saint. When her body was taken to the church of Santa Maria Nuova, where she was to be buried, the procession moved through the streets of Rome amid spontaneous popular acclaim. "Francisca is a saint. Francisca is in heaven." Her name flew from mouth to mouth. It seemed to float in the air, carried by the grateful enthusiasm of an entire people. So many miracles happened near her body that it was impossible to bury her for several days. A nun, who had been bedridden with a paralyzed arm for 6 months, touched the saint's body and was instantly healed. An oblate who had fallen ill and could not be present at Francisca's death, upon hearing the procession approaching, rose from her bed, supported by a sister, and managed to reach the coffin. The moment she touched it, her health and strength returned. 2 young men, leading dissolute lives and irreligious spirits, upon hearing about the miracles at the church of Santa Maria Nuova, began to mock and laugh at the matter. Driven only by curiosity, they went to the church, approached the coffin with mocking gestures of respect. But as soon as they knelt before it, their hearts were simultaneously touched. A sudden change came over them. Having come to mock, they stayed to pray, rose from their knees only to seek a confessor, and returned home that night converted to God, living thereafter as devout Christians. The canonization and the title Romana. In 1608, Pope Paul V decreed the canonization of Francesca, much to the joy of the Oblates of Tor di Specchi, the monks of Santa Maria Nuova, and all the people of Rome. On May 29th, in St. Peter's Basilica, then recently built and magnificently adorned for the occasion, after a solemn pontifical mass, in the presence of the Sacred College and a vast gathering of foreigners and Romans alike, the decree was proclaimed that placed Francesca among the canonized saints. Rome was illuminated that night. The fiery dome of St. Peter's and the ringing of countless bells announced to the surrounding plains and hills that God had looked upon the humility of his servant, and that in their own way, all generations would call her blessed. Pope Paul V, upon canonizing her, called her the most Roman of all saints, recognizing that Francesca had spent her entire life in Rome, never leaving except for a single pilgrimage to Assisi, and that she had dedicated every day of her existence to serving the city and its people. For this reason, she became forever known as Saint Francesca Romana. Her feast day was set on March 9th, the day of her death. And those who have been in Rome on that day can testify to how alive the devotion still is. The worship still offered to Saint Francesca, the beloved saint of Trastevere, the model of Christian matrons. What Francisca teaches us. The story of St. Francis of Rome teaches us that holiness is not found only in monasteries or in great heroic deeds. Holiness is doing God's will wherever He places us. It is loving your family, caring for your children, being faithful in marriage, and seeing the face of Christ in the poor and suffering. Francisca shows us that heaven is much closer than we imagine, and that our guardian angels are always by our side, ready to guide us on the path of love. She lived during one of the most terrible periods in the history of Rome, with wars, famines, plagues, and divisions in the church. And even in the midst of all this, she found God in every moment, every task, every suffering. She was the girl who wanted to be a nun and became the mother of an entire city. She was the wife who loved her husband faithfully for 40 years. She was the mother who buried 2 children and kept standing. She was the noble woman who sat among beggars to ask for alms for the poor. She was the saint who saw angels with her own eyes. And she tells us, through the centuries, do not be afraid. Your guardian angel is by your side. God is with you every moment. Do His will wherever you are, and one day you too will hear the words she heard in her final moment. Heaven is opening. The angels are coming down. The story you just heard is only one of the many extraordinary lives of the heroes of our faith. If you were inspired by the life of St. Francis of Rome, subscribe to the Sancti et Heroes channel.